The photograph on my phone shows the food court entrance at the end of East Corridor B. Tile floor, metal trash can bolted to the left wall. The subway sign still half lit, even though that franchise closed 8 months ago. I took that photo my second week on the job. I take photos of everything. That's not a quirk. That's documentation. That's the difference between a good incident report and a he said, she said argument with your supervisor at 6 in the morning. I'm standing in East Corridor B right now. The food court entrance is not at the end of it. There is a hallway there instead. It goes left. There is no hallway on the building plan that goes left. I stood there for probably 40 seconds, just holding my phone up, comparing the photo to what was in front of me. Same floor tile. Same wall color. That particular shade of beige that I can only describe as forgotten. The trash can mounting bracket was still on the left wall, but the trash can itself was gone, and so was the subway sign, and so was the entire east end of the mall, as I had photographed it 6 weeks ago. I want to be clear about something before I get into all of it. I am not a person who frightens easily. I'm not a person who sees things. I did 4 years of overnight stocking at a distribution warehouse before this job, and before that, I did 2 years of parking enforcement on the university campus, and I have spent a significant portion of my adult life alone in large, empty spaces at 2 in the morning. And I have never once thought I was going crazy. I think carefully. I write things down. I check my notes. That is exactly the problem. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I took this job at Foothills Mall 11 weeks ago, that I work alone from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and that somewhere around week 7, I started to understand that the building I was logging patrol routes through was not the same building I had logged patrol routes through the week before. Let me tell you about the mall first, because the mall matters. Foothills is on the north side of Tucson, up near La Cholla, and it was built in the 80s when that part of the city was still expanding. 900,000 square feet, 2 anchor stores, 3 floors if you count the lower service level, and at its peak, probably 200 and some tenants. Now, it has maybe 40. There's a cinema on the north end that still runs. That's the only reason the place hasn't been fully shuttered. There's a gym, a couple of insurance offices, a dialysis clinic, and a rotating assortment of smaller retailers that seem to change every few months. The rest of it is dark storefronts with paper over the windows and that particular quality of silence that only happens in large spaces that used to be loud. The floors are polished concrete in most of the corridors. The tile was ripped up during a renovation that was abandoned about 3 years ago. When you walk the patrol loops at night, your footsteps come back to you off the ceiling, which is maybe 40 feet up in the main atrium. It's not an echo exactly. It's more like a delay, like the building is a half-second behind you. I noticed that on my first night and thought it was interesting in a harmless way. I don't find it interesting anymore. The job itself is straightforward. Clock in at the security office near the south entrance, do an equipment check, radio, flashlight, keycard, incident log, then run the patrol loop. There's a standard route that takes about 45 minutes if you don't stop, and you're supposed to run it every 90 minutes. In between, you monitor the alarm panel answer any calls to the security line, and log everything. Every door check, every light outage, every observation. My supervisor told me on my first day that the log was the most important thing, that if something happened and I hadn't logged it, it effectively hadn't happened as far as the company was concerned. I took that seriously. I take most things seriously that I'm told to take seriously. The patrol log is a physical binder. Cardboard cover, 3-ring, sits on the desk in the security office. There's a new sheet for every shift. The previous guard, the one who had this job before me, his sheets are still in the binder, clipped behind the divider tab. I read through them on my second or third night because I was bored, and because I thought they might tell me something useful about the building. Most of it was routine. Door check times, a couple of incident reports about a homeless person near the loading dock, a note about a light fixture on level 2 that kept flickering. But in the margins, and this is the part I keep coming back to, in the margins of a lot of the pages, there were handwritten notes that weren't part of the official log. Small handwriting, pencil, sometimes so faint I had to angle the paper toward the lamp to read it. Not incident reports, more like observations, rules almost, things he had figured out and needed to say to someone. The first one I noticed said, "Hallway past Old Sears runs long. Add 3 min to loop, or you'll think you missed the turn." I thought that was just a navigation note. The mall is confusing at night. Signage is missing in a lot of places, and the overhead lights run on a zone system that leaves whole sections completely dark. I had already missed that turn once myself, so I wrote his note into my own margins and moved on. The second one said, "Don't trust the directory boards. They were updated in March, and they're wrong." I thought that was just a complaint about management. I wrote it down anyway. The third one, and I found this one later, folded inside the back cover of the binder like he'd tucked it away on purpose, said, "If the length of a corridor does not match what you walked yesterday, walk it again. If it still doesn't match, log it and do not walk it a third time." I read that twice. I turned it over, thinking there might be more on the back. There wasn't. I put it back where I found it and didn't think about it again for 2 weeks. Here's what my routine looked like in those first weeks. Clock in, equipment check, start the loop. South entrance, east corridor, food court, cinema wing, north corridor, west side, anchor, back through the middle atrium, service level, back up to south. 45 minutes. Sometimes 50 if I was being thorough with door checks. I logged everything in the binder. I took photos when I saw something worth noting. A water stain spreading on the ceiling near the gym. A door that was unlocked when it should have been keyed. Things like that. I kept a separate note-taking app on my phone for observations that weren't officially loggable. The first thing I noticed, and I noticed it but didn't flag it, which in retrospect was the error, was that the patrol loop was getting longer. Not by a lot. A minute, maybe 2. I attributed it to variation in my own pace. Some nights I walk faster. Some nights I stop more. I didn't worry about it. Then I noticed that the photo I'd taken of the north corridor, the one showing the distance between the gym entrance and the corner turned toward the cinema wing, didn't match what I was walking. In the photo, the gym entrance was about 30 feet from the corner. I could tell because there was a bench bolted to the wall at the midpoint, and the bench was roughly centered between the two. When I walked it, the gym entrance was farther. The bench was no longer centered. It was noticeably closer to the corner. I told myself the bench had been moved. Maintenance does that sometimes. Bolted furniture gets unbolted and shifted for cleaning or no apparent reason. I checked the next night, and the bench was in the same position. Still off-center. Still not where the photo showed it. I went back and looked at the building plans. My supervisor had given me a laminated copy of the floor plan on my first day, and I kept it in my locker. I pulled it out and measured the north corridor with my fingers against the scale bar. According to the plan, the distance from the gym entrance to the cinema wing corner was 62 feet. I paced it off that night with deliberate steps. I count my stride as about 2.5 feet. I came up with 31 paces, which put the distance somewhere around 77 feet. I paced it again. Same result. I did what any reasonable person would do. I assumed I had made an error. In the measurement, in the pacing, in my reading of the scale. I wrote in my personal notes that the north corridor appeared longer than marked, and left it at that. But then I went back to the previous guard's log, and I found a note I had skimmed over before, written in the margin next to a patrol log from about 4 months ago. It said, North corridor was 62 feet in January. Check it. It's not 62 feet anymore. He had measured it too. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with it in the security office under the fluorescent light that buzzes at a frequency slightly higher than any other fixture in the building. And I thought about what it would mean if a corridor could change length. I thought about load-bearing walls and settling foundations and the particular geology of the Sonoran Desert, which I know almost nothing about. I thought about whether the previous guard was reliable. I pulled out more of his sheets and read through the margin notes more carefully. There were maybe 30 of them, spread across 4 months of logs. Some were navigation notes. Some were observations about the building's physical condition. Cracks in walls, ceiling issues, doorframe warping. But about a dozen of them were what I had started thinking of as rules. Things he had figured out and written down with the careful precision of someone trying to be useful to whoever came next. The service-level stairs on the west side have moved. Use east stairs only after midnight. The distance from Atrium Center to south entrance changes depending on which direction you're walking it. Always walk it south to north on your return loop. Do not use the directory board near the old gap location to navigate. It shows a corridor that doesn't exist yet. That last one I read 4 times. Doesn't exist yet. I checked the date. He had written it in November, about 6 weeks before his last logged shift. I don't know why he stopped working here. I never asked my supervisor, and I realize now that I should have. What I know is that his last logged shift was a standard patrol report. No incidents noted, all doors checked, nothing out of the ordinary recorded. But in the margin of that final sheet, at the bottom, in handwriting that was smaller than usual and pressed harder into the paper, as if he needed it to stay. The building is moving, not settling, moving. It's heading somewhere. I think I know where. Do not follow. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that a person reading that would think, okay, this guy had a breakdown. Isolated night shifts, empty building, not enough human contact. It happens. I've seen it happen to warehouse guys who worked overnight alone for too long. Your brain starts filling in the silence with something. That's what I thought when I read it. And then, the corridor past the old Sears started running long. His note had said to add 3 minutes to the loop to account for it, and I had been doing that, and it had been accurate. But then, one night, it wasn't accurate. I added 3 minutes, and I still came out on the wrong side of the turn, farther down than I should have been, with a stretch of corridor behind me I couldn't account for. I added another minute. Then 2. I started mapping it, not on the official floor plan. I didn't want to mark up the laminated copy, but in a small notebook I bought at the drugstore on Ina Road. Graph paper, the kind with the light blue grid. I walked each corridor with a measuring wheel I borrowed from the maintenance supply closet and logged every measurement by date, time, corridor, and length. I did this every night for 2 weeks. The data was not ambiguous. East Corridor B had grown by 9 feet over the 2-week period. The North Corridor had grown by 11. The corridor past the old Sears had grown by 6. The west side had shrunk by what I calculated to be about 4 feet, which I noticed because a door that had previously been at the midpoint of the corridor was now noticeably closer to the south end. I plotted it on the graph paper as best I could. And when I looked at the cumulative change, where the growth was happening, where the shrinkage was, it wasn't random. The east side was expanding. The north was expanding. The west was compressing. The south, as far as I could measure, was stable. The building's interior was drifting northeast, toward a section of the mall that, according to the floor plan, was an exterior wall. I went to look at that wall. It was the east terminus of East Corridor B, the end that, in my photograph from week 2, had shown the food court entrance. I stood in front of it and knocked on it with my knuckles like I was checking whether it was hollow, which I understand is not a reliable test, but I did it anyway. It sounded like a wall. It looked like a wall. It had the same beige paint as every other surface in the building. But there was something about the texture of it that didn't match the walls around it. The surrounding walls had a slightly rough surface, painted cinder block. This wall was smooth, almost smooth enough to be drywall. Something newer, something added. I wrote all of this in my notebook. I wrote, East terminus of Corridor B does not match exterior wall material on adjacent sections. Appears newer. No seam visible. I did not write it in the official log. I don't know exactly when I made that decision to keep my real observations out of the official record, but by that point it had already happened without my quite noticing. The official log showed clean patrol loops, all doors checked, no incidents. My notebook showed a building that was quietly pulling itself in one direction, one night at a time. The previous guard's rules started making a different kind of sense once I understood the migration pattern. They weren't just navigation notes. They were a snapshot of where the building had been at a specific moment. The rules were accurate when he wrote them. They had been accurate for him, but the building had moved since, and some of them were now not just outdated. They were actively wrong in ways that created real problems. The rule about the West Side stairs was the first I tested directly. He had said to use the East stairs only after midnight, implying the West stairs were somehow unreliable. I'd been following that without questioning it, but when I finally checked the West stairs, I found them perfectly functional, better lit than the East stairs, with a working motion sensor on the landing. The East stairs, however, had developed something I hadn't noticed because I'd been avoiding them. The landing between floors 1 and 2 was about 8 inches lower than the approach suggested, not dramatically enough to see it coming. Just enough that your foot came down expecting solid floor and found it 8 inches sooner than your body was ready for. I'd done it twice in one night without understanding why I kept stumbling. His rule had been accurate once. Now, it was exactly backward. The rule about the directory board near the old gap was more complicated. He had noted that it showed a corridor called North Spur E, a short connector running between the North Corridor and what would have been the exterior wall. There was no North Spur E on the floor plan. There was no door or opening where it would have been. But when I measured the North Corridor again that week, the growth was concentrated at exactly the point where the directory board showed North Spur E's entrance should be. I stood at that point on the north wall and held my flashlight at an angle to read the texture. Smooth, drywall, the same material as the east terminus of Corridor B. I hadn't noticed it before because I hadn't been looking for it, and because the overhead light in that section had been out for weeks, and my flashlight doesn't show texture well when you're moving. I put my palm flat against it. I don't know what I expected. It was cool, slightly gritty from the paint. I left a smudge from my hand and stood there looking at the smudge for a moment, the way you look at something when you want to make sure it stays where it is. Then I went and finished my patrol and logged everything as normal. That night, I reread all of his rules and sorted them into 2 lists in my notebook. Rules that still applied. Rules the building had already moved past. Most of them I could sort without much trouble. The one about not walking a corridor a 3rd time, I couldn't sort. It didn't feel outdated. It felt like a warning about something that hadn't fully arrived yet. I left it in its own column with a question mark next to it and moved on. The patrols kept getting longer in ways I couldn't explain away. 45 minutes became 55, then 70, then 80 on one occasion. I wasn't walking slower. I was tracking my pace. The loops were getting longer because the corridors were getting longer, and no combination of route adjustments could get my time back down to baseline. My supervisor asked about it over the radio one night. I told him I'd been doing more thorough door checks. He said fine. The night I found the new hallway was a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because I had logged patrol start at 11:14 p.m. and had noted that the food court security camera on the east side was showing a partial obstruction. I couldn't tell from the monitor whether it was something on the lens or something physical blocking the field of view, so I had flagged it for my next loop. I walked East Corridor B from the atrium end. The atrium lights were on their dim overnight setting, and the corridor itself ran about 2/3 lit, 1/3 dark at the far end where I'd identified the new wall material. I had my flashlight. I was walking at my standard pace, counting distance the way I'd started doing automatically, when my beam caught the end of the corridor and showed me the hallway. It went left. Clean right-angle turn, painted drywall walls, commercial carpet beginning about 6 feet in, which was unusual because the rest of the mall was concrete or tile. The carpet was that mid-grade commercial pattern in dark green and gray that you see in office buildings and medical waiting rooms. It looked well maintained, not dusty, not water-stained. The fluorescent light inside it was on, which was notable because the overhead in that section of Corridor B behind me had been dark for weeks. I stood at the mouth of it for a while. I took a photo of the hallway. I took a photo of the floor plan next to it to document the contradiction. I turned around and looked back down Corridor B toward the atrium, visible as a small disk of yellow light far behind me, and then turned back to the hallway. My flashlight beam was around the corner, not the edge spillover of ambient light, the center of the beam. The main oval of it was visible on the wall of the hallway, around the left turn, casting the particular sharp-edged shadow pattern that only a focused flashlight makes. And it was moving, slowly in small increments, tracking across the drywall the way a beam moves when the person holding it is walking carefully, checking the walls as they go. My flashlight was in my right hand. I was pointing it into the hallway entrance, hitting the carpet about 4 feet ahead of me. I looked at my hand. I looked at the beam on the carpet. I looked at the wall around the corner, where a second beam was still moving in the same slow, deliberate patrol rhythm. I did not go around that corner. I want to be precise about that because it was a choice, not a panic. I stood there and I thought about the previous guard's rule. Do not walk a corridor a third time. And I thought about whether this qualified as a third walk of anything, and I ran through every geometric explanation I could construct for a flashlight beam appearing around a 90-degree turn with no reflective surface capable of bending it. I ran through all of them. None of them fit. I took 3 photographs of the wall around that corner. All 3 show the same thing: an oval of focused light, edge fall off, consistent with a handheld flashlight, moving in small increments from left to right across new drywall. Not ambient, not reflected, moving. Then I opened the patrol app on my phone and I wrote. I wrote the date, the time, the corridor designation. I wrote, "New corridor visible at east terminus of Corridor B, absent from floor plan and all prior patrol log entries." I wrote, "Corridor shows evidence of active or concurrent use." I wrote, "Secondary light source visible around left-hand corner, source unidentified, behavior consistent with handheld flashlight in motion. Did not enter corridor." I wrote it in my notebook, not the official log. My notebook, the graph paper one from the drugstore on Ena Road. And then I wrote the thing I'd been circling around for 3 weeks without writing it directly. The building is migrating northeast. I have 11 nights of measurements. The movement is consistent and directional. The previous guard documented an earlier phase of the same movement and stopped coming to work. I don't know what is at the northeastern terminus. I don't know what the building is oriented toward, or what it means for a building's interior to have an orientation at all. What I know is that the floor plan is no longer accurate, that most of the previous guard's rules have been superseded by the movement, that there is a hallway where an exterior wall was marked, that the hallway is lit and occupied by something walking it in the same pattern I walk, and that I have been, without fully understanding it, following the building's new layout every single night. Every adjustment I made to account for the migration was a step deeper into where the building was going. I had been correcting my route toward the destination, not away from it, every night. Because my job is to know the building, and my instinct is to stay accurate. I finished the loop on an alternate route, avoiding East Corridor B entirely. I clocked out at 6:04. I left the notebook on the security desk, open to the last page I'd written, the same way I imagined the previous guard had left his margins. I walked out through the south entrance into the parking lot. The parking lot felt longer than it should have. I registered that and kept walking. I didn't measure it. I didn't count my steps. I got in my car and I sat there. I've been sitting in this parking lot for going on 40 minutes now. The sun is coming up over the Catalinas, which from this lot is a specific orange you only get in the desert at that hour. The kind of color that lands on saguaro and palo verde and makes everything look briefly like it was meant to be here. It's a genuinely nice view. Tucson is like that. Nice in the directions that don't include what you're trying not to look at. I opened my patrol app before I started the engine. I don't remember deciding to open it. There was a new log entry. Time-stamped 0641. My shift had ended at 6. The entry read, Corridor, East B, Status, Patrol in progress. I looked at it for a long time. I checked the entry ID. It was filed under my login credentials, my badge number, my account, and the timestamp was 4 minutes ago, while I was sitting in this car in this parking lot, with my phone in my hand and the south entrance visible through the windshield behind me. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. Then I checked the back seat. My notebook was there. I had left it on the desk. I had placed it there deliberately, open to the last page so whoever came next would find it the way I had found the previous guard's margins. I had walked out of that building without it. I am certain of that, the way you are certain of something you did with purpose. It was open to a page I had not written. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't the previous guard's cramped pencil either. It was something between the two, neater than his, more deliberate than mine, like someone had taken both and settled on a version that belonged to neither. One line, centered on the page. If the exit is visible, it isn't yours. I have been sitting here since then. I don't know how long. Long enough that the orange on the Catalinas has faded into the flat white light that Tucson becomes by 7 in the morning. Long enough that 2 other cars have pulled into the lot, probably gym members, and one of them glanced at me while they walked past because I've been here too long to look like anything normal. The app is still open on my phone. face down on the seat. I haven't looked at it again. I don't know if the entry is still there or if there are more. Here is what I keep arriving at. I thought the danger was the hallway. I thought if I didn't go around that corner, I had made the safe choice. I thought documentation was the same thing as distance. Write it down, file it away, establish that you observed it and did not engage, and that would be enough to stay outside of it. But the log entry came after I left. The notebook followed me out. The record doesn't stop when you do. I spent 11 weeks trusting the record. Now I'm starting to understand something I should have understood earlier. The record doesn't describe the building. It describes where you are inside it.